What happens when a politician's personal wealth just explodes by, what, 3,500% overnight?
Right.
And at the same time, in her home state, over $344 million in taxpayer money is being stolen in this massive fraud scheme.
It's an unbelievable intersection of two major stories.
It really is, and that is the startling convergence we are diving into today.
Both happening in Minnesota, and, they really speak directly to this core issue of accountability.
Absolutely. So you, our listener, send us the source materials for this.
Yeah.
The financial disclosures, committee reports, all this deep investigative work.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission today is to connect the dots. The staggering financial surge of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and this catastrophic fraud happening in the exact same state.
And we have to start with the sheer scale of the numbers. The source material lays out two figures that are, frankly, almost unbelievable.
Let's hear them.
First, you have Representative Omar's household net worth. In her 2024 disclosure, it surged to as high as $30 million.
$30 million. And this is for a member of Congress who, not long ago, was publicly talking about not being a millionaire.
Yeah.
About having student loan debt.
Exactly. And then there's the second number. This is the environment this all happened in.
Right.
Minnesota is grappling with federal fraud charges that total over $344 million stolen from state programs.
Programs meant for the most vulnerable people.
And that includes the single biggest federal fraud in the state's history, the $240 million child nutrition program scheme.
So our deep dive today is really about looking past those shock statistics and asking how. How does political influence, how do regulatory loopholes and, just lax oversight create this environment where both things can happen at once?
Where opaque political wealth and just industrial-scale public theft can thrive.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the money. How does a sitting member of Congress who's earning the standard salary suddenly disclose a fortune of up to $30 million?
The surge in wealth is tied almost entirely to two private businesses owned by her husband, Tim Mynett.
Okay.
And the real centerpiece here is a firm called Rose Lake Capital, LLC. It's a D.C.-based venture capital firm.
And the sources show the valuation of this one asset. It jumped from less than $1,000 in the 2023 filing.
That's right, less than $1,000. Then you look at the 2024 disclosure, and its valuation is listed in a range of $5 million and $1 to $25 million.
That one jump is what drives that 3,500% increase.
It is, but this is where the scrutiny really gets intense.
Look at the income.
Right. Exactly. Despite this massive valuation, which on paper makes the family incredibly wealthy, the 2024 filing reported no income. Zero income generated by Rose Lake Capital. That's actually down from the pretty modest income they reported the year before.
So how is that possible? How can something be worth up to $25 million but make no money?
This is the core structural question the sources highlight. It's a critical regulatory loophole. These are not assets audited by the FEC or anyone else.
So they put a number down?
Congressional rules allow for a very broad range of self-appraisal of private firms. VC firms' value is, inherently based on future potential, not cash in the bank.
So it's what they think it could be worth someday.
Precisely. And critics argue this creates the potential for let's say, a strategically inflated non-cash valuation. It's all on paper.
Okay, and there was a second business, too.
Yes, eStCru, LLC. It's a California winery. It followed a very similar path, jumped from a maximum value of $50,000 in 2023 to between $1 and $5 million in 2024.
And that winery has its own baggage, right? The sources detail this investor lawsuit where Mynett and his partner were accused of, I'm quoting here, fraudulently misrepresenting the business.
Right. That case was settled for an undisclosed sum, but it certainly doesn't help the optics of this sudden massive jump in value.
It creates this huge contrast. These massive asset valuations on one side of the ledger.
And on the other, you have their liabilities. Omar personally still reports holding up to $50,000 in student loan debt.
And credit card debt, too.
Yes. So the question becomes, if you're truly worth $30 million, why is that debt still there?
And some reports we saw said the husband's firms had, less than $700 in the bank at the end of 2023?
That's what some reports indicate, which really gets to the heart of the matter. It's a reliance on these self-appraisal rules to make a statement about wealth, completely separate from actual liquidity.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. After these numbers came out, Rose Lake Capital, they allegedly quietly scrubbed the names and bios of 9 officers and advisors from its website.
Right. And what's so fascinating is how the lack of transparency in the valuation is then immediately compounded by a lack of transparency in who is even at the firm.
And these weren't just random people. They were former Obama administration officials.
Correct. And removing them from the public-facing site, well, that just intensified calls from critics for a real investigation into where this $30 million figure actually came from.
So that sudden wealth depends entirely on a lack of transparency in private financial filings.
Yes.
What happens when that same catastrophic lack of oversight is applied to hundreds of millions in public funds?
Okay. That is the tragic transition to the Minnesota social services scandal. A situation where a systemic failure allowed for the theft of huge sums of money meant for the most vulnerable people.
We're talking about a disaster. Fraud charges totaling over $344 million across 3 different schemes. Can you just detail the scale of this for us?
The headline theft was the child nutrition program. Over $240 million stolen.
$240 million.
The scheme involved defendants claiming to serve thousands of meals to kids during the pandemic, but they only provided a tiny fraction of them.
And the money.
Allegedly used to buy luxury cars, homes, real estate. A fundamental abuse of federal aid programs.
And the sources confirm 2 other major frauds as well.
That's right. Over $104 million defrauded from the housing stabilization program.
So help for the homeless.
Yes, through false claims. And then another $14 million stolen by billing for autism treatment services that were never provided.
When you say $344 million stolen from social services in one state, it's hard to even wrap your head around that. That money was supposed to feed and house people.
The tragedy is just immense. And the sources allege this was all preventable.
How so?
The documents we've seen allege that Minnesota state officials saw early signs of fraud in the main nonprofit Feeding Our Future, but they just failed to intervene.
So profound negligence.
And that's where the negligence intersects with political connections. Conservative watchdog groups report that Governor Tim Walz was allegedly caught on tape.
Okay.
Pledging to help the Feeding Our Future fraudsters in a conversation that also included talk of campaign donations.
So he was warned about them, but then promised to help them.
And Walz and his son reportedly accepted contributions just days later.
That is explosive, and that led to Congress getting involved.
It did. The House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, he launched an investigation demanding documents from Governor Walz and the AG, Keith Ellison, expressing, quote, serious concerns about this.
And this raises a really dark question, one that's in the source material. This allegation that some of this stolen money, it didn't just buy luxury cars.
No. One of the most credible and alarming allegations is that some of these funds, funneled through the Minnesota DHS, were allegedly sent overseas to support terrorist organizations.
Including Al-Shabaab and ISIS.
Yes.
So if that's true, taxpayer money meant for hungry kids in Minnesota was diverted to potentially fund terror, all because the state failed to do its job.
And there's a legislative angle here involving Representative Omar. She drew scrutiny for sponsoring the Meals Act of 2020.
What did that do?
It temporarily eased oversight rules for federal meal reimbursement during COVID. The very rules that critics say these fraudsters in Minnesota just walked right through.
So the intent may have been good, but in practice, it opened the door for this massive theft.
That's the argument critics make, that easing those critical barriers was what enabled this industrial-scale fraud.
You know, the lesson from both these stories, the opaque personal wealth and the massive state fraud, it seems to be about the importance of financial guardrails.
That's right. We've seen transparency fail on a political disclosure level and fail spectacularly on a public oversight level.
And that brings us to the structure that enables all this, the system of campaign finance itself. Critics say it's designed for wealthy interests to operate in the shadows.
Exactly. It creates the same kind of systemic lack of transparency we've been talking about.
And for an informed listener, I think the really fascinating question isn't just what soft money is. We know that. It's why the courts seem to view the right to spend unlimited secret money as more important than public trust.
Let's get into that conflict, transparency versus free speech.
Right.
So traditionally, you have hard money, donations directly to candidates. That's heavily regulated, it's capped, it's transparent.
But then you have soft money.
The independent expenditures. And this is where, for critics, the system just breaks down. After rulings like Citizens United, There are no federal contribution limits on money given to these independent groups.
The only difference is coordination, right? If I give to a campaign, it's capped and disclosed. If I give unlimited amounts to a super PAC, it's independent and often it's secret.
That's it. And this is where dark money comes from. These 501c social welfare groups, they don't have to disclose their donors.
So the source of massive political influence is completely hidden.
The opacity in those groups, it mirrors the opacity we see in the self-appraisal of those private assets we talked about earlier.
So it creates a system where small direct donations are watched like a hawk.
Right.
But huge unlimited contributions from corporations and the mega wealthy are not, as long as they use these outside vehicles.
Now, we do have to present the conservative counterargument here, which defends this very structure. And that view is really rooted in the First Amendment. It argues that any restrictions on this kind of spending are an unjust restriction on free speech.
Their argument is that money spent on political ads is political speech, and you can't censor how much someone spends on speech.
Exactly. And they'll also point out that stricter regulations in the past haven't really been proven to stop corruption or increase public trust.
It really leaves us with this big philosophical question, doesn't it? Does the appearance of corruption from all this secret spending justify restricting what the courts have defined as free speech?
Or should transparency just apply equally across the board to public funds, to political office, to everything?
So we started this deep dive with a congresswoman's 3,500% wealth spike tied to these firms with really questionable income, all built on a self-appraisal loophole. And we connected that to a crisis at the state level, where hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars were stolen, potentially funding terrorist groups, while whistleblowers were apparently ignored.
What the sources really reveal is a systemic failure of transparency and accountability. It spans private wealth disclosure, public welfare programs, and the very structure of our political finance system.
In every single case.
In each instance, it's lax oversight and these mechanisms that allow for hidden financial maneuvers that put taxpayer funds and public trust at severe risk.
So what does this all mean? If the legal and regulatory systems consistently prioritize these opaque financial moves, whether it's self-appraising your own assets or unlimited dark money spending, while at the same time they fail to stop $344 million from being stolen from the poor, does the public trust even stand a chance of ever being rebuilt? That is the real question to consider.